thank you for making time for this important conversation. I wanted to start off with you, Kate. You have received sustained global acclaim in tech for social impact. And I'm not just flattering here. I think your work has been very notable in advancing technology access across Africa. I want to understand the aspect of the access to tools, resources, mentorship, which remain a big challenge for those within the space that you operate in. What is the missing link? What has been the missing link in availing that? Because it's been a challenge for decades. We keep hearing those as major challenges for people within the tech space. What has been the missing link in closing that gap?
So I think the missing link has been big technology actually caring for African developers. There is one thing to note when you think about how innovation is being driven across the world, specifically AI innovation. You look at the US, it's coming from big tech, research lab, coming up with a new model, a new compute infrastructure. You look at China, very similar, but then you look at Africa, the innovation is driven a little bit differently. There is an abundance of AI talent and developers and startups here. They just need the tools and the platform to show what they're building. Yeah. And it's kind of an applied innovation. They're using technology that's being built in the US, but applying it differently to our context and localizing it for our context. Yeah. So we need to make sure that we carve a platform for these developers and the startups to actually show the innovation that they're driving to the world.
Yeah. Interesting. I want to hear from Fatima. I mean, we are hearing that we have the developers across the continent. But a lot of the developed solutions, AI solutions, often like, we had from Kate, are often imported, or we get it from external developers. How do you ensure that African developers are at the heart of the party, and they're not actually just spectators who get it from wherever it comes from? How do you ensure that we have more developers from within the African continent?
So I think, as Kate mentioned, right, I think on the continent, a lot of things happen grassroots, and you have several communities. Fun fact, Kate hired me at NVIDIA, right? So at NVIDIA, they call me a baby Kate, so she's had like a long history in big tech. But you have Indaba, for example. They have 32 chapters across the continent in countries like Mali, Sudan, Chad, South Africa, and so forth. And earlier this year, they had a summit, and in the summit, they had 1,200 developers, all showcasing work that they're doing. You had the OpenAIs on ground, NVIDIA was on ground, DeepMind was on ground, showcasing the work that they're doing. So I do think that the work is being done. There just isn't visibility into it.
Invisibility into it. But Kate, does it matter where it is developed?
It does.
Why should it matter that Africa becomes a center or a key player in the development of these AI solutions?
I actually think Africa already is. And the reason is because, like Fatima mentioned, the AI innovation here is driven from a grassroots standpoint. So you just have to change your lens. If you change your lens and if you think, okay, I'm going to consider innovation not a new platform or a new large language model, but I'm going to consider innovation a developer who has built a smart camera that can be deployed in the bush and identify animals completely remotely with no access to connectivity. That is innovation for us. Yeah. It might not be innovation for the rest of the world, but here on our grounds, it matters. Yeah. So I actually think that we're already leading, or we're already at the forefront of AI innovation. Yeah. We just need to remove our biases and change the way we're looking at AI innovation.
Right, removing our biases. What will it take? How do we do that, Kate?
How do we do that? Reverse the curve. I mean, today, we were just talking about this backstage. A lot of the investments in AI and in deep tech still come from the same places. US, Europe, that's where most of the VCs are, and that's where most of the capital lies into, right? African VCs are still extremely risk adverse because they don't understand the technology. So they would say, well, I'm more used to invest into fintech or e-commerce, so this is what I feel comfortable with, and that's what I'm going to go through. So to remove the biases, we actually have to all get around the table, put experts at the heart, whether it's companies from NVIDIA, whether it's our startups from the ecosystem, and educate everybody on what AI is and how AI innovation in Africa is being driven.
Yeah, Fatima, I've had a lot, especially in that particular regard, of where the funding comes from. And I heard from one of the forums that I've also been privileged to moderate, where the truths have been told, that the VC funding, external FDIs will dry up at some point. And so we've already even started seeing that happening in terms of the flow of capital from the external people who support in that case. How does the ecosystem in Africa prepare for this?
So I think at NVIDIA what we do is, well, we have a program called Inception, right? And we have like 15,000 startups part of it. Hugging Face, OpenAI, they're all part of it, including Amini as well. And what we do is we focus on technical capabilities because that's what we find wins the race at the end. And I think when people talk about AI in Africa, there's a misconception that fintech is probably one of the biggest acquisitions that we've seen. And the case is InstaDeep, right? So they were acquired earlier for 700 million. And then the other question is, well, is it a one-off? We have 320 startups at NVIDIA that we look after when it comes to Africa. And when it comes to VCs, the questions typically are, what's the technology that they're using and who are they building for? And we find that from an early stage, they're building for the global market. So they're building in automotive industries, agriculture, and those are things that you can replicate across regions.
Right. And if I could come back to you, Kate, especially on the funding aspect, but for women-led ventures, what I know is 2022 female-led startups raised 25 times less of what their male-led counterparts did raise. I want to understand from you, just give us an inside feel or look of how difficult or how easy it is to raise funds as a female-led venture.
The first round was extremely difficult. I'm a woman, an African woman, building from Kenya and doing deep tech and AI. You've not heard that. You don't hear that every day, right? So the first one was extremely difficult for us because originally we wanted to raise from African investors because we had that thesis as a team that every time an African startup was successful, the capital was coming from outside, so the wealth was going outside. So we really wanted to focus on African investors, and what we found is that most of them actually do not understand AI, deep tech, and it was really hard. So we had to do what we didn't want to do and go to investors who could understand the technology, didn't really understand the African market, but understood that there was a market outside of Africa for what we were building. So we were building a global company from Africa. And then things started to ease up. Our second round that we just closed was way easier than this. Thank you, Time, because you gave us the platform and the recognition. And that helped us a lot because all of a sudden you're shining the light on a team that's purely African, building from the continent, but who has global customers outside, but is also driving innovation, from the continent that can be reverse engineered somewhere else in the world, and that really helped. So it's all about the platform and the visibility and the voice you give to African builders.
Right, and we want to see more of Fatima's and more of Kate's. And so I want to hear from Fatima, from where you sit, what's been the biggest challenge? And probably if you could just give us an experience of trying to raise capital as a lady or as a woman who is within the tech space that often considered a male-dominated space. What's been your biggest challenge?
So I don't necessarily work within the sections of raising capital, right? So we partner with VCs and then we connect the VCs to our startups. And I think the biggest challenge is, founders typically being asked, are you sure you're building this from the continent, right? The bias is an issue. The other thing that's an issue is there aren't many of us in this space. Like I said, I randomly met Kate in New York and we were speaking and she told me what she was doing. And I'm like, it's crazy, right? And we're both born and raised in Europe and then we both remitted ourselves back. So I think that's probably the challenge, right? Finding examples of what's possible. The story of InstaDeep, it's not loud enough. I don't think people know it enough. I was in Nigeria last month and I was asking developers why aren't they building in AI, and they're like, they don't have any examples. But when it comes to fintech, they've been shown the possibilities, right? Many people also don't know that Google has an AI lab in Accra, the first one. It's been there since 2018. ARM has 5 AI labs in South Africa. They have 5 AI labs in Ghana. So again, I think the challenge really is creating visibility regarding all the work that's being done in the space.
Right. Kate, I know we are built within the mentality of seeing is believing. And if we do not see, it's hard for us to believe. And I wanted to just share with us some of the practical examples of how AI, let's not talk about the future, let's just talk about now. Let's be in the present of how it's already transforming or could transform socioeconomic activities across the continent.
So there are 3 things that as a continent we have. On one side, we have abundance of natural capital. On the other side, we have abundance of young talent. And then now we have access to AI and data. We'll talk about data as well because there's no AI without data. So the convergence of those three things actually make it so that a lot of the applications that are already coming from our grounds are solving for social economic issues, environmental, access to financing. And for me, my personal thesis is that AI to be useful, it has to be invisible. So take, for example, using data and AI to make better or more informed decision-making. That decision-making happens across the value chain. That could be useful to a farmer to understand better what's happening on its farm. That could be useful to an insurance. Insurance works at the basis risk to calculate the basis risk and provide agricultural insurance to our people. That is useful to a bank to calculate a credit score and give access to loans and microfinancing, all the way to a government to also better food security and understand the effect of climate change on their country, and a global private sector company, because once you have data and AI, you have transparency, and transparency creates trust, and trust accelerates economic investments.
Right.
So once you have, AI is actually applicable throughout the entire value chain and is applied today throughout the entire value chain. It's just not as visible as it should be.
Right. I want to put the government institutions off the hook for now,
Yes.
but I'll come back to them. But Fatima, I want to hear from you. We've often asked what we want as developers from government institutions, from policymakers, from financiers. But I want to twist that question and ask, what is it that you think you'd want from developers?
It's a great question. I've never thought about it from that perspective. But I think it's just, to understand that when it comes to AI, it's delayed gratification, right? So there's a saying that if you spend 10 hours building an app, you're going to get an app. If you spend 10 hours tinkering, building an AI model, you have no idea what you're going to get. And that's also very difficult because the reality is we are in a society where economic challenges are rife. So you don't necessarily have the luxury to sit in a lab for 3 to 5 years to tinker to see what comes out of it. But that's typically some of the challenges that when it comes to developers. They feel like it takes too long. The learning curve is extremely steep. There aren't that many universities that are offering comprehensive AI courses. If they are, they don't have access to lab. So they have to go through a lot of loopholes when compared to building a fintech app. So it's just trying to understand that, it really has a heavy research and development background when you're choosing this field, and the money will come, but it will just come later on. So I think that's typically what we ask of developers.
Right. Kate, what would you ask from government, policymakers, just in a nutshell? If they are to listen to you today, if there's that one thing they need to change to make the environment better for developers?
I would say please do not copy and paste AI regulations that are being done in the US, because today that's the model they're following. A few days ago, actually, Kenya released the draft of an AI and robotics bill, and the entire AI ecosystem in Kenya said, we cannot accept that. So they are now trying to tax any innovation that's coming from developers and startups because they don't understand. And what they're doing is taking a template that's being created in the US and EU with regards to data and AI regulations and applying this on our continent, not really realizing that, again, the AI innovation on our continent is driven differently. As much as you build an AI model in the US, you apply it in Africa, it doesn't work because it has to be localized. Regulations have to follow the same path.
Right. I don't want to turn you into a prophet, but allow me to ask you, what do you see in the next 5 years? How does the future look like in under 30 seconds?
Yeah, I can tell you what it looks like now, healthcare and agri-tech. So we're seeing AI solving sickle cell, triple breast cancer, which affects Black and brown people, agri-tech, crop detection. So I think that's what we're seeing, and we'll continue to see that in the future.
Right. How about you, Kate?
So historically, we've been a geography that has been consumer of technology. So something is created there, and then we use it, we apply it. Next 10 years, I hope that we're going to flip the coin, and you will see more and more deep tech startup like InstaDeep really building infrastructure, core technology infrastructure from the ground in Africa. And for me, that's the hope.
Right. Thank you very much. I think that's all the time we had for this conversation.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. We can.